Welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. Excited to let you know that you can now pre-order my new book, You Can Change Other People, the 4 steps to help employees, colleagues, even family up their game. I wrote it with Peter Bregman, who is my coach teacher, my coaching mentor, and it's now available for pre-order. And when you pre-order, you get a whole bunch of fun, valuable bonuses, including 3 recorded demo conversations where we show you exactly how to go through the 4 steps with real people, and a 1-page cheat sheet so you can follow along. The book itself, when you pre-order, will arrive in your mailbox or inbox on September 22nd, 2021. Here's how to do it. Go to plantyourself.com/pre. That's just P-R-E, all lowercase. That will forward you to the page on the Bregman Partners website that has all the information about how to pre-order. Basically, you just order somewhere, either online or at your local independent bookshop, and you send us the receipt via email, and then you get your bonuses. So I'm really hoping that you will help me make this book a big success. I hope you will find it very valuable, and that once you get it and read it, you'll use it and recommend it to others. And so if you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you have gotten value, this is a really easy way for you to give back. It would be a huge help. So again, that's plantyourself.com/pre, P-R-E, all lowercase. All right, let's get to today's show. Hey, today's conversation is a continuation down a rabbit hole that I've been on for a while. It all started because Ben Bella Books, the publisher of Whole and the Low Carb Fraud, asked me to help them promote one of their new titles, which isn't anything that I really have talked about. Oh, I'll tell you about that sound in a second. But I met the authors, John and Anna Gabriel Mann, and we had a wonderful conversation. And it turned out that Anna and I had a lot to talk about around coaching, around different approaches to helping people act as mature adults when there are parts of ourselves that are still responding to the world as children. And she introduced me to several bodies of research that I have been following for a while now, including Terry Real, a relationship therapist, just finished his 1997 book, I Don't Want to Talk About It. No, I'm not being coy. That's the title. It's about the hidden epidemic of depression in men. And it's really important work, and a lot of it speaks to me. Anyway, that sound you heard, that sounded like a dog shaking, is actually a dog shaking. We don't know his name. My daughter was coming home late last night, almost hit it with a car. I was out in the street with a collar and a broken rope. So we took it home, and I gave it a waterless shower, him, and here he is making noise and being extremely agitated as I try to get my work done in the office. So we'll keep you posted. He's a sweetie. Maybe I'll throw a picture up on the show notes for today, which will be plantyourself.com/521. Anyway, Anna Gabriel Mann returns, and we have a wonderfully deep conversation about all sorts of things related to how do we break the habits that are not conducive to being broken easily, that aren't just about, okay, well, let's fix the loop, or let's try something else in its stead, or let's think about it, or let's change the environment. But when the habit is so deep, it comes from a place where we made this decision, this agreement with the world before we could even use language. And so it's part of our brains that we can't actually access. So that's kind of the introduction to the conversation, and then we go all over the place. I hope you really enjoy it. Without further ado, Anna Gabriel Mann, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I know. I'm looking forward. I'm also looking backward because we kept having to stop ourselves from having it in preparation because we're just both so eager to talk about these issues. Before we get there, can you, for people who hadn't met you from the episode a few weeks ago, can you or introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm a clinically trained therapist, and I'm also a coach. And I gave up doing couples therapy in lieu of working with individuals many years ago. Because I really believe that it's the individual who can move the needle the farthest in any relationship, whether it's with your child, with your parent, with your sibling, with your kids, with your spouse. And I also feel that, each one of us has to self-examine and grow. And that's one of the fundamentals of the book my husband and I wrote is how do you really personally grow? What are you willing to really take on and look at in yourself that will change the scope and the range of all your relationships?
Right. And we got to be good at marketing here, right? In honor of John. So the book is called The Go-Giver Marriage.
Yes, The Go-Giver Marriage. And it's based on 5 principles. And the 5 principles really are based in not only developmental theory, but they're based in neurobiology. They're based in the idea that when you change the way that you behave, the whole entire tone of everything changes. And also when you change the way you think, which is more of a cognitive behavioral model, you also change the way that you look at the situation. So in all relationships, but particularly in marriages, it's where all our material from the past rises, and any of the patterns and behaviors and adaptations that we had to make as a child in order to survive all rise up and say, hello.
So I want to talk about adaptations because I'm starting to understand it in, I think, a more sophisticated way. Thanks to when we were talking offline a few weeks ago, you mentioned this summit led by Terry Real, who's a couples therapist, and he talks a lot about the adaptive child. I'm realizing that I know you said this, that you used to do couples therapy. Now you just work with individuals. And I'm just finding it ironic that you send me to Terry Real, who says, I only do individual work in relationships, practically. Right. So that's really interesting. But I'd like to frame the whole thing as we were talking about in the tension or the synergy, I'm not even sure which, between past and future. So, as a psychologist, the tradition of psychology in the West is like Freud, sit on the couch and tell me about your mother, or free associate, right? Which is very deeply psychological. We're both coaches in which we're looking forward. And there's ways in which I think in the coaching community, we can become so forward focused that we miss some things in the past that could be helpful, that could be useful reflections. And as I'm not a therapist, I don't exactly know where the line is. So I'd like for this conversation not just to be for coaches and therapists, but for humans in general who are thinking about how much of my past is relevant to the things I want to accomplish in the future. And if some of it is, or all of it is, how do I go there without wallowing, without becoming a victim, without feeling like it's predetermined, my limits? And that's kind of the broad scope of the guidance I would love to elicit from you today.
Absolutely. Well, first, I would say that in my coaching model, I believe that everyone made a key decision between 18 months of age and 24 months of age when they were first sort of individuating. That's the first step in individuation. It's the first moment where you really start to grasp that you are separate from your parents, you are separate from your siblings, you are your own individual, and you are making decisions about the world at that point. And so in a state of either fight, flight, or freeze, you make a decision, a key decision about the world. And that decision colors everything for the rest of your life. And if it came in the fight category, you're somebody who has a sort of a fighting chip on your shoulder about how people behave and how things happen in the world and how they happen to you. And you might have a kind of, not necessarily aggressive style, but a critical viewpoint that is sort of the lens that you see through. If it happened in a freeze state, there's more confusion in your life. You're always trying to figure things out, but you never quite feel clear. If it happened in a flight state, there's more anxiety underneath this decision, and it colors your sense of self. So all of those, and I'm sorry if I'm opening a Pandora's box and confusing you, but I believe that all good coaches, and this is where I'll take it, Howie, all good coaches really are good at questions. They're coaching alongside of you. And they're sometimes coaching in front of you, and they're sometimes coaching from behind you. So they're supporting you to move forward, but they're alongside of you asking really pertinent, really strong questions. So let's say, for example, I have a client and he's really struggling because he just, he's just really intensely critical of everything and everybody in his life. And he sort of feels like it's a pattern and a habit and he can't get out of it. The question is, how does criticism serve you? How does this habit serve you? And it gets people talking and exploring. I know you have a question. I can see it.
Yeah, always. I'm a good coach.
Okay. It gets people looking and exploring, because when you ask somebody about their history, if you're critical, then who was critical of you? A lot of times you'll immediately see somebody sit back in their chair and say, oh, wow, hey, I grew up under criticism, on steroids. My parents were critical, my grandparents were critical. But I had one parent in particular, and they'll summarize it for you. They'll give it to you really quickly. Right. And I think that it opens the door to the awareness, because awareness is the first step in really understanding, how does this behavior serve you or not serve you? And can you catch yourself in the moment and go, oh, there I am again. And how can I take a breath? A lot of therapy models will try to teach couples and individuals that when you're under stress, when you're in that difficult moment, stop, take a breath, give yourself a little breathing room, if you will, before you react. So trying to help people to get control of those issues.
All right. So you're right. There's tremendous amount that I want to unpack here. The first question is, like, those three are all aspects of the neurology of protection, right? Of danger awareness. Are you saying that this happens to everyone, regardless of whether they had, trauma? Like, a child of really good parents is still going to have to choose one of these states? And are they like, default states, or just states that occur in stress?
Well, let me put it this way. By the time you're a year and a half, every last human on earth knows how daddy feels about mommy. They know how mommy feels about daddy. They know which child is the favorite child in the family and which one isn't. They understand the dynamic of what's going on, and they are making very keen decisions about how they feel about it all. That's all I'm saying. When I frame it in fight, flight, or freeze, it's a particular style that this child develops. Some kids will, and it doesn't have to have trauma at all. It's just in reaction to what's happening in the family. If there's a lot of chaos and a lot of emotional, yelling, if one of the parents is alcoholic, whatever, there may be a freeze component for this child, because they're just trying to stay out of the line of fire. It isn't about trauma for them per se. It's simply their emotional reaction. What's their style? Are they fighters? Have they always been fighters, even at the year of age, where they just, slamming their fist on the table and saying mine? Or are they more in reaction to what's happening? So it's more of a flight. And so I share that simply because I have found that people really do develop a primary viewpoint that colors the way that they address a lot of situations. And you'll see it come in, you'll hear it in their language. You'll ask people a question and they'll say, gosh, I don't know. I've thought about that a lot. I just don't know. And you'll see that's part of their basic premise, is that they made a decision in a freeze moment, and it kind of paralyzed their knowing, if you will, and they still hold on to that stance.
One thing I'm thinking about now is, so I have no recollection of my life at that point. And I think, the theory is that I'm not verbal, I hadn't developed a verbal capacity to be able to, to have storable memories. So like, do we have access to those times, or are we just looking at who we are now and kind of reverse engineering?
I think that it's, for me, it's, bringing a client toward their past is only about the integration with how it's serving them now. So I'm not trying to go back to the 18 to 24 period of time and say, okay, this is the decision you made per se, and let's talk about that. That to me is like getting on the couch and doing psychotherapy in a way that I don't believe serves. But what I am trying to say is, we all have adaptive patterns. So going back to the adaptive child is the child who made an adaptation somewhere in that frame of time, somewhere between 18 and 24 months, or somewhere between 18 and 4 years old. They made adaptations in order to survive the environment they were in. And those adaptations continue all the way through their childhood and into their adolescence and adulthood. So it becomes a pattern that you live with. So what I say often when I'm talking on podcasts just about the 5 secrets in our book is, the opposite of one of the secrets is criticism. And criticism is alive and well in lots of relationships. It's in the boss-employee arena. It's in the parent-child arena. It's in the spousal arena. And it's even in the best friend arena where, somebody will say, well, gosh, do you always have to be so negative? Or whatever they say. But, criticism is just one of those habits that once people get into it, it's really easy to stay in it and to be looking for things to be critical of rather than looking always for things to be positive about or things to be appreciative or grateful for. So it is a neurological loop that you get into. That's the service of it. So when your adaptive child has made a decision or an adaptation, that adaptation is still with you and you're carrying it in every aspect of your life, And the neurobiology of it is once you have awareness of it and once you have an understanding of how to move to the opposite side of it, how to breathe into it, how to lose your anxiety in the moment, it shifts everything because then you can start being proactive in your relationships and in your life in a way that serves keeping this pattern not only understood and being aware of it, but really being able to have it be a best friend that you utilize to move forward in life in a much more powerful way.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, anyone who's spent any time around a toddler, let alone trying to raise one, it's kind of horrifying to think that kid in the cart who's like screaming and melting down because you won't get him the Frosted Flakes is in a sense running your emotional life when you're under stress.
Yeah, exactly. And, coming back to criticism, I think that, I just find that a lot of type A's, type A people, high performance executives, high performance women that are, really working hard in their career and doing great things, are often people who make intense, strong decisions and who don't waste time, assessing and sort of doing critical analysis, if you will, in a way that I'm not certain always serves.
Uh-huh. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to write down once because I want to come to it later and not forget. But a quick story about criticism. So I have a group of people that I've trained as coaches, mostly in the health and wellness world. And one of them is a medical doctor. And we had a group talking yesterday about like someone comes in who is paying for guidance and help and advice about how to eat better. And in the middle of the clinic session says, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. This is, and the person I'm training, the doctor, is like, I just felt like I needed to be the parent in the room at that moment. And so we talked about like what that would look like and what it would mean. And it turns out it would basically mean a form of criticism, right? A form of I know better than you. And you have to listen to me now. And, so I guess I offer that in terms of like, if all of us have struggles with various urges and impulses, and it could be the toddler who's running those, but also as we see people who are engaged in self-destructive behaviors, it's very easy for us to become a critical parent of them, because it seems like that's the part in them wants to play that game with the part in us. Does that sound fair?
And well, I agree, but I would also say that you can only coach as deep as you go on your own. So I would also, my feeling would be that the coach really needs to examine their inner material in terms of what's driving them to feel like they need to be the critical parent in that moment. Because it isn't necessary to go there at all. I mean, I think you can actually work with that client by saying, oh, it's so tempting, isn't it? And just kind of align with them, get alongside of them, and then be able to say, but how will that serve you?
Yeah.
And you're paying to talk to me right now. I'm paying to be here. And so I want to sit right next to you, and I want to be very comforting, because I really understand what it's like to want those French fries with the garlic aioli. Yum, yum. I'm in. So commiserating with them, joining with them, a lot of times I think, and this is something in the therapy model with couples, is that with couples, there's often, of the two, there's one who we call the one down, and they're more desperate for the relationship, and they're the one that takes the one down position. And the other one is the one up position. They're more aloof, they're more in control. So I find that, in our personal lives, we do the same things. We make decisions where it's like, I'm with this person who really wants me to do this, but I'm just going to do what I want. It's a little more coming back to the fight or flight defiance. It's that pattern where they've decided, screw you, I'm going to do what I want. So in that moment, you can't try to point out that they're in this early childhood pattern. That's really not going to get you where you want to go. It's about joining with them around the impulse to not treat yourself well and to not take care of yourself. And then being able to help them through questions again, how is that going to serve? Do you think it's going to serve? And how do you feel after you've, that for 3 days in a row you had, this kind of food, ethnic food, and that kind of ethnic food, and you just, went for hamburgers and French fries, and then, you had a big shake in the middle of the afternoon, and then you had that tall sugary drink at Starbucks, and, you realize after a few days you've gained weight, you're not feeling so well, how does it make you feel? And do you want to shift it? Because if they start really answering honestly, what I find is that they'll start telling you about the ways that they feel depressed about it all, the ways they feel out of control. Mm-hmm. And then there's always an opportunity, as a coach anyways, to really redirect them toward the places where they can feel in control, and the minor steps rather than the major. Right. But I think as a coach, you can never take that position of the critical parent. You need to listen, because I know what's going on here.
Yeah, and in my training, sort of trauma-informed polyvagal theory, whenever I see someone in fight or flight or freeze or fold, what I feel like my job is to provide for them is safety in that moment.
Exactly.
Right. So like they didn't develop fight, flight, or freeze because one day someone came and said, here's 3 cards, pick one. Right. It was in moments of perceived uncertainty or lack of safety or threat that this, develops in the first place. So I think there's a way in which being in the doctor's office and perceiving that the doctor is going to make you give up your garlic fries with aioli triggers that 18-month to 24-month threat response, right? Like, I'm under threat again, just like that.
I agree. And at the same time, none of it serves moving forward. And, I think it's important to join with them and commiserate with them. And I also feel that everyone, including the doctor, has that fight, flight, freeze, or fold perspective. And so I think that, it's easy to get into the authority figure place. And some of the most successful executives that I coach and train are totally in the fight stance. That's why they get so much done.
Uh-huh. All right. So that's what you talk about when you say like making that pattern your best friend.
Well, I think that they've made the pattern something that it is an adaptive pattern. They've made it work for them, but you'll find usually that in some places of their life, it's clearly not working. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know a lot of high type A executives who are really, kicking it at work in the best possible way. Their work life is really, really successful, but their personal life is a mess.
Mm. Right. So I want to ask you about, like, you pick one, but like I'm coaching someone who's a, very high powered, brilliant executive who, like, the feedback that this person gets is sort of a little hesitant and indecisive, like, brilliant analyst of data, always looking for more information, calm, thoughtful, credible. And so I'm sort of mapping that a little bit onto freeze from what you said. But there's also like 10% of the 360 feedback is this person can be explosive and highly critical. And I'm wondering if there's like an adaptation of an adaptation, like, you're freeze for most of the time, but then at a certain point you become like, Mike Tyson biting off somebody's ear.
Exactly. And there's tributaries to every single one of them. Usually everybody has a primary place that they come from, and then they have, sort of some tributaries in all the others. Mm-hmm. I absolutely concur with that. Yeah. And, going back to just bringing the so-called adaptive child and the history back in, I think that, there's just a moment, you can always see it in a coaching session where it's like, okay, so who was explosive and hurtful to you? If you have these moments where you really go off on people, who did that to you?
Okay. That's a big part of what I want to discuss, because I've never asked that question as a coach. Partly, well, I mean, we can explore the reasons that I haven't, but mm-hmm. Let's say one of the modalities that I rely on is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy or training. And ACT wouldn't do that. ACT would just say, okay, you've got this thing. So when does it hook you? Let's unhook. Let's diffuse from the thoughts. Let's take perspective. And what are the values-based actions that you can take at that point? And there's no concept of where did you learn that? So that's kind of and that aligns very well with coaching. So where do you see the value of asking that question? And then maybe we can get into some of the dangers to avoid, or how far to take it. Like what's good about saying, where'd you learn that, or who did that to you?
Yeah, where do you think that you learned that pattern? I just always refer to these things as patterns, not, some embedded personality disorder. I think it's really inappropriate to use any kind of psychological jargon or labeling or anything like that. So a pattern is just a really good way to look at it. Where'd you learn that pattern? Or where do you, or who did that to you is a question that just wakes people up to the idea that, oh, maybe I developed this pattern because somebody did it to me. Maybe it really was something I learned. Yeah. And I only bring it because a lot of times I will have a really high power person just suddenly sit back. I can see the whole change in their demeanor, and they go, oh, yeah, no, I know exactly who was that person for me. Was my explosive mother or my explosive father or this, and then I say, well, I don't find the value necessarily in us spending time circling what your mom did to you or what your dad did to you, because I really want to keep all of this moving forward. But what I am feeling right now is like I want to put my arm around you through the Zoom, because I want to say that must have been rough. And I've had men and women just well up with tears in that moment and say, yeah, it was awful, actually. And they might launch into a little bit of a story. I usually will try to listen and be really compassionate if they do. And then let's move forward. Let's take it to, okay, so here's what I like to share with people at this juncture, is what I will say. I have sat with so many people, and all of us, and I am very, very candid with my clients about my own history, in that I grew up with a mother who was depressed and who would hit us. And so I'm a great believer that there was and is some sort of history that's not positive in everyone's life. It's not a bed of roses. We all had a parent who, or two parents who, ask any. I
that's so interesting, because especially in sort of the world of high achievers in our culture, there's a very strong get over it ethos of like,
there is,
right? Like, yeah, poor you, victim, world's smallest violin. Right now, what? And it feels dismissive, doesn't it?
It does. But let me share this, that those patterns are just going like a neurological loop that cannot stop. And you will never escape those patterns until you have compassion for the part of you that chose that pattern. That pattern is a reactive pattern, and it's not about wallowing in it, examining it endlessly. It's not about therapizing. It's not, forgive me for all the jargon. It is, though, about awareness. And, since you referenced Terry Real earlier, awareness is the key. When I'm sitting with somebody, I have worked with clients who were systematically groomed and physically assaulted by a family member for 2 or 3 years in a row during the 7 to 9-year-old phase of their life. And that has a massive impact on their ability to trust in the world. And they're also reactive. They're reactive. So when you can join alongside of them and help them to understand that kid who was very old and wise, forgive me, 8, 9-year-olds, they have it. They know what's going on in the world. They're not missing things. That kid deserves to be understood and to get attention for the way that he had to adapt and react. So when you have that high-powered individual who's really reacting like that, if he can start to realize that reaction is the part of him that wanted to run out of the room and couldn't, and or that had, really visceral responses to feeling like screamed and yelled at by his parent, he starts to realize that he doesn't want to be that parent. He does not want to be that parent. And it shifts immediately when he realizes that this was somebody else and he's taken their pattern and he's running with it. He immediately goes, oh my God. And then my next question is always, and you don't want to be that person, do you? Oh my God, no, I don't. I do not want to be that person. I am not that person. You can see them get worked up. I am not that person. I will not be that person. I'm not that way with my kids. And then sometimes they'll say, except when I lose it. And then I am that person with my kids. And all of a sudden the conversation gets more human, it gets more personal. But then you have an hour with this person. So we've just hit a hot spot, and we may have hit it, 35 minutes in. We've only got 20 minutes left, or 15, depending on your time slot. And so I am always about, okay, I think this is a really big moment, and we just need to put a punctuation mark here. Because you are one of the most powerful. I will take a minute to witness them. You are one of the most powerful people I know, Howie. You're strong. You coach. You're always looking at what's going on with each individual. You so care, you're so compassionate, you're a brilliant strategist in your job. Whatever it is that I know that this person has, because I have really high power clients too that are juggling a lot of balls in their jobs, and it's their personal life that's falling apart. So they're trying to figure out how can they shift that. So it's always about coming back to that place where you acknowledge how powerful they are. And then you acknowledge the inner wisdom. You have your own wisdom. The reason I ask so many damn questions is because I don't have the answers for you. I know that you have the answers and that your inner wisdom always knows. This has been a blind spot, and now it's not blind anymore. So how about that for opening a big crack in the door? And they usually just are like, whoa, I never thought of it that way. And they don't need to examine it. That's the piece. That's where I really take issue with the whole psychological approach. It's like, okay, we could do, months and months in therapy and try to get them, into a more whole place with themselves. I don't find that they need that. Mm-hmm. They really need awareness, because they can usually shift the pattern with awareness. And then the second part for me is helping them to get the neurological loop that takes it to its opposite. So whether it's criticism or control or contempt, when you have contempt for your spouse or contempt for your workers that work under you, you really have to get some awareness on that, because it won't shift on its own.
So contempt is adaptive.
Yes.
Right? Can you draw the line, like from the 18-month-old to the 7 to 9-year-old who's being groomed and abused? Like how does that person turn into an adult who expresses contempt as a pattern? What does it do for them?
Because the very fact that there were always many adults in their life who allowed the grooming and allowed the abuse to happen, and you can talk all day long about whether they knew or didn't know, but they allowed it. By their unconscious behavior, they allowed it. And that makes kids who feel out of control feel contempt for every last adult in their life, especially the abuser. And if you have an alcoholic father who comes home and verbally abuses your mother in front of you, throws you upstairs to go to bed, and then proceeds to rant around the house and knock down chairs and drink. And, you're terrified. You are in a flight. You're in a fight, or, you're in a flight. And you don't usually pull up the fight until you become an adolescent or you feel bigger and more powerful. But all of these have an impact. They have an impact, and you will carry them forward.
So how does the contempt serve? Like, what's the function of the contempt to keep that person as safe as possible?
Contempt is when you've lost all respect for the person in front of you. And the way that it's serving to keep you safe is it allows you to be in control in the judgment of things. You get to be the one that says, you're not good enough. You're not, you're not good enough.
So at a certain point, infants kind of very young children, in order to survive, have to believe the parents are right. Right.
Yes.
Like, okay, so if I was abused, then it must have been my fault, or daddy was an alcoholic, or daddy left because it was because of me, because it's too horrifying to think of the parents as not being. But at a certain age, a protection could be, I'm now asserting moral authority here, even though there's nothing I can do about it. I'm the one making the judgments, and you people are contemptible.
There's that. And there's also when somebody is acting in a contemptuous way toward you, they're demeaning you in a way that you feel not good enough in a very major way. So that the flip side of that, I don't feel good enough, is to flip it to the place of either I'll show you, and or, the person who's really not good enough is you. But the pattern is simply a way of not having faith in the other, not being able to have faith in things. It's about the trust factor. And contempt is, Contempt is when, it's like criticism is level 1 and contempt is level 2. So contempt is just the sister or brother to criticism. It's reached a new level where you now are treating that person with disregard. Mm-hmm. So I find they always go hand in hand. And so I will always circle back to the idea of criticism and where does that show up and is it functioning for you?
I have an urge to broaden this slightly to the political. I don't know how dangerous that is. I don't know. I imagine we don't disagree fundamentally about a lot of things. But what's coming to me is I just finished a book by Bill McKibben, who's a climate activist, he wrote in 2019. It's called Falter: How the human game playing itself out. And he talks about why is climate change so hard to deal with? It's not just the economics or the energy. So it's also an ideology that was basically best expressed by Ayn Rand, the Russian American novelist who wrote, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and The Virtues of Selfishness. And I remember reading those books in my early 20s and being quite captivated by them, like many are. And it was just this idea of the heroes are basically contemptuous of everyone who's not as ruthless and single-minded and talented as they are. And Bill McKibben points out case after case of these leaders of industry in Silicon Valley, on Wall Street, who lionize Ayn Rand and take her books as their philosophy and give them out to all their friends as Christmas presents. And I wondered, is contempt kind of a feature of our society in a certain way?
Oh boy, that's a huge box to unlock.
And you can decline. My brain doesn't have to go there. It just came up.
Yeah, I think I don't even want to open that, only because it is, we are certainly the more polarized than ever before. And I think in terms of climate, we're really polarized. And yeah, I just don't know if we're going to be able to take action fast enough.
Yeah. Well, let me generalize it to something I think is a more useful question for the individual. There are certain adaptations that are good in our, that our society tells us are good, right? So it's, whether it's a certain type of selfishness or ruthless ambition, or being, people who are critical of other people on the internet. It's called throwing shade, and they get lots of clicks and views and advertising money. So when we look at our, if you were to look at society as a whole and treat it as a person, there's a lot of those adaptive child behaviors that we, I think of as culture. They're basically our civilization's operating system.
They are, but I have a greater belief in the goodness of humanity, and also of that a lot of people see that stuff, but they see through it too. And a lot of the so-called shade is coming from younger people who just haven't found themselves and haven't found their niche and haven't found their way. And they're just trying to get notoriety and get seen. They're trying to be witnessed. I think the desire to be seen and witnessed is number one priority for all of us.
Oh.
And so I think, I'm not a believer that it defines us. I definitely see the negativity, but I see a lot of positivity. I see a lot of people trying to make a difference. And I see a lot of people who have massive followings online that are putting out incredibly powerful content. That's really, look at Jay Shetty, look at Lewis Howes, look at the people who are just putting out just impeccable positive content all the time.
And so thank you for balancing me. and also for would you say that one of the ways that each of us can bring about a more beautiful world is to work on ourselves so that we are able to see and witness others in their goodness, in their functionality, and even have compassion for their adaptive parts?
It is the drive of my practice. I actually love uncovering the absolute jewel that each human being is. and helping them to not only see it, but live it, breathe it, be it, because they are so powerful. And any adaptive behaviors they have, any of the baggage that may define the ways that their life isn't working for them, they're all things that they can get aware of. They're all things that they can get in control of. I mean, there is like power in each and every one of us, like in every cell. And so I just think, yes, you're right. It's about uncovering the jewels of who we are and how we can be the very best self that we can be in order to enable this sounds very cosmic because I don't really hold it this way, but I do on another level believe that when each one of us is contributing at the highest level of who we are, the entire world, the entire organism, if you will, changes for the better. And so, yeah. And I mean, it's even like, I don't know, I keep mentioning people online because if you ever follow Gary V on Instagram, the guy is rude and in your face, but he's brilliantly compassionate, brilliantly sensitive. And he is giving a message that says, quit the false illusions, quit the BS, quit the trying to jump over the next guy to get to your next success, quit the shortcuts. Everything takes work, but it takes dedication, but don't lose yourself in thinking there's a fast fix or that you can, use power over others. His message is amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, just, when you said it's like this cosmic thing, like, like if I just try to imagine the world without humans in it, like everything would work. Like it would still be like forests and meadows and oceans and like schools of fish and birds. Like it would be beautiful, right? Like, and
yeah, the planet would come back in a hurry.
And that's just every creature being its best self. Like we're
Yes.
the ones. There's a beautiful line from a David White poem. It says, why we are the one terrible part of creation privileged to refuse our flowering.
Yes. And so let's go back to that history then. That is the thing that makes the refusal of the flowering. When you have a wound, that wound stays with you, even if it felt like it wasn't, your parents never got divorced. My parents never got divorced. Your parents never got divorced. You had a good high school and college. You went to college. You had opportunity. You find yourself thinking, well, what have I got to complain about? But the truth is, wounds exist for people and they have an emotional impact and they definitely, I know a lot of people who are very hard on themselves. Like I'm a real high performance person. I get stuff done, but I've always been very hard on myself. And somebody pointed that out to me recently. And I remember just kind of sitting there and kind of going, ooh, I've been seen, And, it's sometimes in those moments when you're seen, if the person isn't judging you, they're just witnessing, it can be transforming. So that is my job as a coach, is to witness in a way that doesn't shame, that doesn't blame. I don't want to go blame their mom. I don't want to go blame them. I don't want to blame anybody. But it opens a door to a different level of understanding and awareness that can break patterns in a New York minute in terms of their ability to shift things.
Now, I have clients who have and are aware of dysfunctional patterns, and they can be fused with them. They can think like, that's been the reason for my success, as opposed to they were successful in spite of that thing. And I'm wondering, are there people that okay, yeah, I get angry, but boy, it motivates everyone and it keeps people on their toes. And yeah, my father did that, and my father, disciplined me harshly, and I'm glad. Like, if he hadn't done that, God knows where I'd be today. Like, do you work with people who are defending their adaptations a lot?
I do. I absolutely do.
What's your play?
I think it's, my play is to let them hold it for a while. I don't actually try to jump in because then that's the judgment again. If I try to jump in and say, oh, Howie, I don't believe that. I'm sorry, but that's not, all it does is make them feel like I just shamed them or that, so I will keep moving in the process until we hit another roadblock and there's something going there that relates to this other piece and say, well, how does this fit with, I know your dad was always really critical of you and really hard on you, and that drove you and that made you successful in ways that you don't believe you'd be successful. But I got to tell you, my honest take on you, Howie, is that you would have been successful if you crawled out from under a rock, because you have boom, 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 and being able to give them my bullet list of how powerful they are and why that's so powerful. So I think you were powerful despite your father. And often it's so huge just to be seen in a way that's compassionate and that says, no, your father didn't do this. You did this. I've just seen grown men and women well up with tears and just be like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I don't let myself believe that. I don't hold that. And I said, yeah, I can see that you don't hold it because it's still outside of you. You still believe that you only got there because you were yelled at, told you had to get there. But the truth is, you bootstrapped yourself. You're the one that worked for low wages for 6 years after college and developed your own app and did this and did that and did it, and so it's always, for me, coaching is always about witnessing the individual, which is therapy, but it isn't therapy because I don't want to wallow in their past. I want to build their sense of self so that they really understand they can do anything. So let's get busy and do it. Let's not thank your father anymore because he didn't do this.
Right. So it reminds me in terms of the type of education. So when I'm teaching people about exercise and diet, for example, I will refer to our evolutionary past to explain why they have a sweet tooth, why they don't want to get off the couch, and in terms of survival, as these are adaptations. And so what you're doing here is just sort of customizing them to the individual's origins and their the environment in which they were raised, in addition to, okay, we're humans coming from a line of humans who lived on the savannah, and you had to, you ate whatever you could find whenever you could find it, and you remembered where the good stuff was, and that's why, you salivate when you think about going to Home Depot because they have Snicker bars at the checkout counter, right? So it's all. Now, one of the problems with that is that when I talk to people about that, there are ways in which people can internalize that story and say, well, it's hopeless, right? I'm genetically programmed to behave in a certain way, and doing anything else is going to be a really uphill battle. You're saying something different about learned patterns.
Right. It's never hopeless. It's not only not hopeless, but it's the awareness of, it always comes back to awareness of how the pattern developed and how it served them, but how it no longer does. Because the power is theirs now. It isn't about this adaptive behavior being the thing that drives the power. Being mean to your employees isn't powerful.
Right. So I feel I have a real good sense of how you use the past to inform and motivate present and future without getting stuck in it, and without. Before we jump ahead, you are a trained therapist. Are there things that if for coaches who are listening to this who are not trained in clinical practice should avoid or not do, or signs that they need to get help? If we even open the door for, where do you think you learned that, or who did that to you?
I think that I'm a trained therapist. I'm also a trained coach. And so I really believe that when you see coaches that are also clinically trained, you have a real different hybrid. And there's the ability to see and examine, but not get stuck there. And I also feel that for John and I, and I'll speak for myself, but the process of writing our book, we spent 6 years talking about the secrets. And that was 6 years of therapy and coaching that I was personally doing. So I had a lot of thoughts on what works and what doesn't work, and what are the key elements that we see that are really important to all relationships, not just marriages, but these are really key things. And they're all neurological. You know, you can either be in gratitude and appreciation for the person you love and constantly be letting them know the ways that you appreciate them, which totally warms up the relationship. Or you can be in that critical place of like, babe, I love you, but you got to lose that 10 pounds. You know, it's like, who needs that to say to them while you're eating a plate of pasta? You know, I mean, but people do that stuff in their relationships all the time because those unconscious patterns drive unconscious behavior, which takes you into the neurological loop that's negative, that was part of your adaptive decisions.
Right.
And so that's where it really comes from.
And in relationship, it spins into sort of predictable repetition pretty quickly.
Well, and relational theory is that all of life is relationship. It doesn't matter whether you're at work, whether you're online, whether you're with your kids, whether you're with your spouse, you know, whoever you're with, whether you're with the person who's checking you out at the grocery store, you're having a relationship in that moment. How are you going to behave? Are you going to be short with them? Are you going to be kind? Who do you want to be? That's the other question I ask people all the time. Who do you want to be in the world? Tell me about Powerful Howie. You know, because I just, you know, I love to watch my clients blossom. I love to watch my clients step into their power in ways that they never even dreamed they could, because they suddenly start to live in the part of them that is truly powerful. These adaptive patterns have served them, but waking up to the ways that they don't serve them opens up the gates of power for them.
So you mentioned earlier that you want to shift the neurological loops to the opposites of the adaptive behavior. Can you talk for we have a few minutes left. Can you just talk for a few minutes on how you do that?
I really I'm an educator as much as I'm a coach or a therapist. I find that education is power. And so I will take a moment in a coaching session to say, may I take a teaching moment here? And they always say yes. I even have little handouts that I share with people, but things like, you know, your brain is always cutting new grooves, and wherever you train it to go, that's where it will go. And so you can either decide to train it on the negative track, or you can, you know, which is the track of like, let's go have a fast food hamburger, and then after that, let's have a shake. Or you can train it in the positive groove of like, I'm not really hooked on these green drinks, but I really like it when I put the blueberries and banana and it's palatable and good. So I'm going to do that today. So you just, you know, it's just either or decisions. But, you know, I find that it's just helping people to get back to that awareness of what is it, how is this pattern serving you or not serving you, so that they can shift it. And so helping them to go from criticism to appreciation is simply giving them actions to do. So let's say we have somebody that is a critical boss. Then maybe the actions would be, you know, I want you to read the 1 Minute Manager, catch them doing something right. And then I want you to take time every day to find one thing that you appreciate about the 5 employees that you have direct contact with, and actually go tell them why you appreciate it and that you think they're doing a good job, and watch how they respond. And, you know, so it's just actual little goals that we're setting. And then the next session we'll talk about, you know, what did you do? What happened? And how did it work? And those stories are often really amazing because they're often shocked and surprised. So then understanding in the teaching moment that when you change a neurological loop from negative to positive, you're helping them to change the way their brain thinks instead of the way that it's reacting.
So what I notice is that you're not necessarily trying to intervene in the hardest moment of them being triggered. So the way I think about this is when I'm working with people, I can either teach them how to say no to the candy bar, or I could teach them to add some salad, right? So with the idea that the good stuff can eventually change your self-image a little bit, your identity. You can pay attention to how you feel when you eat it, and it'll start to crowd out the bad stuff. Right. So that's what I'm hearing. So like do the 1 minute manager thing, but not necessarily like do the 1 minute manager thing the moment you feel like exploding at someone. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think it's simpler than that, because I think if we're just trying to bring in the salad, we're just trying to add something that might add value in that moment, or that might just distract them or bring something good in, versus trying to, when I say I sidle up to them, I will commiserate with somebody about the candy bar. But then I also will be like, but here's the contract you made with me around what we were going to work on. So I just want to remind you of the standards of integrity you agreed to and the things that you said you wanted to do. So the question is, is this going to serve where you want to get to?
Right. And then
and I know it sounds like I'm coming back to the place that's critical.
Yeah.
But I always want to keep asking questions so that they can come to that conclusion on their own.
Right. I think what I'm asking about is like when they are in the heat of the moment, what are the tools that you work with them on so that they can have awareness, right? Because we know that when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, your neocortex is essentially shut down, the part of you that can handle all this stuff. So I'm wondering, like, what are some techniques you use to help people have a choice when it often feels like, even today, like I've been doing work on myself and I've been coaching and training for 30 years. When I get triggered, I become an irrational asshole, and there's no way I'm going to think my way out of that. It's got to be breath or body or some sort of interruption that can get me back into a place of neurological safety. And even today, I'd say I'm C+, right, in terms of like where I'd like to get. And so I'm wondering, like, do you have any advice for me or tricks, or when I'm feeling myself triggered?
The breathing is a big one. I really try to help people when they feel triggered. And let me just explain something that happens in couples therapy is that sometimes one person in the couple will be so triggered by the other person that they will literally freeze up. And they can't even respond. They're so emotionally, it's called flooding. So I will also teach about flooding, because flooding is real. Flooding happens to people. And to help them understand that flooding is just a moment of the minute you can feel you're flooded, of taking time to breathe and to step back immediately from the moment in whatever situation it is, so that you can breathe. And so I encourage people to walk away in that moment, not to continue the conversation, to stop themselves and go to their office, have a glass of water, make a cup of tea, breathe a little, think about what just happened, and not to get into a place of shame, but rather into a place of, hey, I just stopped that. I didn't take it to the next level. Because that's, it's a hard one, Howie. That's a deeper, I'll just say that's a longer process in coaching, because I feel that we all have that place in us that kind of can get into self-hatred and holding ourselves accountable in ways that are not very fun or healthy.
Right. And I'm imagining in couples work, there's some dangers of, right, like, you do the psychoeducation and you learn about some of your partner's patterns, and then all of a sudden that becomes another cudgel, right? In relation with the other person, or even in relation with yourself, like, oh, Howie, you did that damn thing again.
No, actually, I find that it raises compassion in the opposite partner. And in fact, I'm working with a couple right now that I just love this couple so much. And they both really, really want it to work. And one person really They both have difficult issues in their past, but one of them, those issues rise up in a way where there's reactions. And the other person is so compassionate about it now, really sees it for what it is, and really understands that it's not about them personally. And I think that when you get to those moments, you're starting to make real gains. And I don't even see them together. So it ends up being that each conversation can be like, well, what happened and what did you do and how did you feel? And okay, so where do we want to take this from here? How are we shifting this? How do you want to work on this? And that's another question I ask a lot. How do you want to work on this? Because the minute a client says, I want to start being nice to myself again, I don't think I've ever been nice to myself. I mean, you've just taken a quantum leap, because that is, and I see it a lot. I mean, in type A's, those really hard driving people, they aren't nice to themselves. They drive themselves to the end of the earth. They're judging themselves every step of the way. And they're comparing themselves to others. They have a lot of dysfunctional monkey mind, if you will. They have a lot of ways that they're thinking that are perpetuating those belief systems for themselves. So, one of my phrases that I use with my clients is, I am willing to be kind, compassionate, helpful, but whatever it is they want to be. But here's the thing. When you say an affirmation, Howie, let me ask you a question right now.
Yeah.
When you say, I am a great guy, always even-tempered and incredibly strong, what does your brain say to you?
Yeah, the bullshit alarm just went off.
Yeah. Your brain says, liar, liar, pants on fire. Okay, but what happens when you say, I am willing to be truly compassionate with myself?
Then it's aspirational. It's not trying to be an objective fact. It's a decision.
Right. Well, research shows that just putting willing into the I am statements of anything you want. I am willing to be wealthy beyond measure. I am willing to blank, blank, blank. Those are affirmations that your brain welcomes in and says, yeah, let me think of some new ways to get wealthy. Wow, I like that idea. Yeah, I'm willing. I'm willing.
Well, when I hear that,
whatever it is.
When I hear that, what I immediately think of is, I can identify 31 ways that I'm unwilling to be wealthy right now, right? Like ways,
right?
Ideas about wealth, ideas,
right?
About,
but that's your
right. That's
the negative neurological loop.
Yeah. So to say
that's the negative neurological loop. So do you want to give the time to the negative neurological loop or the positive one?
Right. So when I say I am willing, then that puts me in the ring. Then the two of them are right up there, and the negative ones have value too. Like there's they're wrapped around compassion. They're wrapped around fairness. They're it's not, like it's a conversation to be had. That the first thing I have to do in order to adjudicate it is define wealth and wealthy, right? Because it's like people who don't believe.
I would say that the first thing that needs to happen is you need to forgive yourself
for
whatever privilege you feel you have. Because what I'm hearing is well, we're on a podcast. I just feel like
go for it. Please go for it.
Okay. I just find that that a lot of us carry shame and guilt around just having, because there's so much not having in this world. There's so much unfairness. And I find that it can really limit our ability to move forward and be fabulously successful, happy, and healthy and wealthy, because we are holding ourselves back. We are limiting in some way our ability to be, our happiness, if you will, because it's not fair.
Right. Well, I don't know how much of me you can see, but I'm wearing a T-shirt that is pretty much a spot-on metaphor for that, which is it's a P for my alma mater, Princeton, but it's also in kente cloth, and it's the African Students Association at Princeton. So I'll wear a Princeton shirt, but only in solidarity with Africa.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
okay.
Well, your mother did a good job. She got that guilt in there. I have to say, for anyone who's listening, it's one of the things I adore about you. You're also very transparent and you're very, very authentic, and it's refreshing. I'll bet your clients adore you.
I could ask them. It's never come up on the exit surveys. How adorable was I? No, I feel
well. I put a high value on authenticity because to me, the true art of coaching is being authentic with your client and being able to hold a really compassionate space for them to grow, learn, and move forward, and to really go after the things that matter to them. And everyone has, there's a difference between goals and tasks. Goals are things that bring you joy. Goals are things that make you go, yeah, I want to wake up every morning and do that. Whereas tasks are just like the to-do list. And yes, you have to complete tasks to get to the juice of the goals, but let's not get them confused.
Right. But I mean, for what comes to me is like that kind of authenticity and transparency is the only way I can hold what my clients bring me, because I'm not brilliant and better than them and smart. Like I'm not any of the things that we kind of want to imprint on a helper, right? Like, the guru complex. And
well, that's the beauty of being a good coach, though, because a good coach knows that they are not the wisdom. A good coach knows the wisdom is sitting in the chair opposite them. And your job is only to uncover it.
Yes. And, so for me, like, feeling like that, if I feel like I had anything to hide, or like I'm just not that good,
Right.
I don't think any of us.
I agree. I understand.
I'm not a psychopath.
I canceled my clients. Yeah, I was recently sick and I canceled all my clients because you know what? If you can't bring your best self, you shouldn't be there. So. I've loved this conversation.
I do too. Anything we didn't get to that you would like to have expressed?
No, I think we unwrapped a lot of stuff. I think it's a deep conversation. I think that, I personally believe everyone has history that has some element of not just trauma, but just, things that we had to learn and adapt to, things that we had to process, we had to figure out. And we all developed behaviors and ways of being in the world that, were in response to all of that. So I think it's a conversation that just opens up people's minds to the idea that you're not just the guy looking back at you in the mirror right now. There's a much deeper self underneath all of our outer persona.
Yeah. And what it does for me fundamentally, as I hear you talk about it, it leaches out any shame, right?
Yes.
Like I can have guilt over specific things that I've done and repairs that I need to make, but it's not, like, oh, okay, this is why I didn't, you can't blame the 18-month-old for the decision they made pre-linguistically. Oh, okay. Like, yes. I think that your whole approach and worldview opens the door logically to some self-compassion, which is where you said the healing begins.
Yeah. I would not only agree, but I find that that wisdom really is in each individual. And when the door starts to open up, they have aha after aha, and they start moving their life forward. And you start to see the goals and the behavior shift and change, and they start really going, oh, I didn't realize. And since I work a lot with relationships, both parents to children, couples, individuals, dealing with their boss, dealing with their life, but relationships, because all of life is relational. I find that when people really understand that it's a neurological loop and that you can live in the positive side of it, and it's not Pollyanna. they start to experience more joy in their relationships. And as they're bringing appreciation and gratitude and things like that into their relationships, the relationship starts to warm up, and the perks back to them are so powerful. And I've had people that practiced from our book, only one partner in the couple, and then after 3 or 4 months, the relationship had warmed up and changed so profoundly that the other partner read the book and was like, I thought this was a bunch of pop, this was like a little pop, pop book, like, we're just going to give you the 5 secrets and you're going to be great, and they instead came back, read the book and loved the book, kind of studied the secrets and started bringing them the other way to their spouse who had already been practicing for 3 months. And the whole relationship shifted in a way that was multi-generational in its dynamic, because a pattern that had been there for the husband had also been there for his father, his grandfather, and his grandfather before that. They had all been the patriarch who was difficult. And everything changed. It was fascinating to watch.
Right. Yeah. My wife is an acolyte of some shamanic traditions and believes in you can heal the past.
Oh, yes.
Right. Like when you take a stance to stop the trauma from moving forward.
Yes.
It's profound.
Oh, it's so true. And it really does shift everything, because the future is always interacting with the past, whether, quantum physics knows it is.
Right. And, my co-author and I joke that, the self-help books is like, oh, I know someone who needs to read that so they can be better to me. Right. So I love that, it's something that, like when I started reading the Go Giver Marriage, I'm like, oh, just give this to my wife. And then like it's an item on the to-do list. Like, who's going to mow the lawn? Who's going to read the book on, the secrets of a loving marriage?
Right. And that's the transactional scorekeeper that, people want to employ in all their relationships. It's like, I did this for you and therefore you need to do this for me. I need you to read this because it's you that needs to change.
Right. Right. And gosh, I'm just transposing all that onto the work I've done with people around health, where the relationship with their self is the same way. Like, I just ate a salad. Now you're going to eat it, or, you just ate the salad, so I get to have the donut. Or, like the different parts of ourselves in this exact same conversation as if it's a dysfunctional marriage.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's, again, a transactional way of dealing with yourself. I ate the salad, so now I get the donut. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, that's an either or, but it's not a win-win.
Right. All right. Well, Anna Gabriel, Mann, it's such a joy to talk to you. I feel like this has been, an hour of professional development plus 13 minutes of free coaching for me. So I appreciate all of that. I hope other folks, can get as much out of it as I have. And so how do people find out more about you, either to get your book or to work with you as their coach, or if you train coaches? Give us the scoop.
Our book is available. Yeah, our book is available anywhere. They can get it at Amazon, Barnes, anywhere. But it's also available on our website, which is gogiver.com. And, gogivermarriage.com. My husband just corrected me from the background.
Yeah, I was thinking that the co-author would have.
Go Giver Marriage. Yeah, gogivermarriage.com is our website. And there you can find links and a calendar to get to my coaching. Okay. And there's also information about our workshop that we do called Living the 5 Secrets to Lasting Love. And there is also information about our coaches training program, which begins in January.
All right, January 2023.
Yep.
Is it online or live or in person?
It's going to be online.
Okay.
It's going to be pretty extensive, and it's a real live, in-depth coaching program. But it's definitely going to be online, because we have people from Australia, Great Britain, Germany, Sweden. We have people all over the world, as well as a bunch of people in the U.S. that have already applied to be in the program. So
awesome! All right, I'll put all that on the show notes for this episode. I'll check it out myself.
All right,
So,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a fabulous day. Hi to John.
Yeah, absolutely. You take care.
All right, and that's a wrap. Show notes again, plantyourself.com/521. Movement news, things are going good with the foot rehab. Played a couple hours of Ultimate last night, just some 3-on-3. And there's a big tournament this weekend that I'm unfortunately going to miss because I am going to be at a rock concert, my first large-scale rock concert since August 1980, when I went to see Jefferson Starship at the Los Angeles Coliseum, and I actually left because it was so loud. So I'm bringing earplugs. I'm tougher than I was then. We're going to see Midnight Oil. If you don't know about Midnight Oil, they're a fantastic, I would say, metal rock band from Australia. Very much an activist group. Peter Garrett, the lead singer, left the band for a while to go into Australian politics to advocate for the changes he wanted to see. And they talk a lot about climate. Their most famous song is Beds Are Burning. The line, how can we sleep when our beds are burning? And they're also staunch advocates for Indigenous rights. So go listen to some of their music. It's good stuff. And so all that to say, I will not be playing Ultimate. There's a small tournament this weekend that I'm sorry to miss. But probably with my foot, it's better that I just take it easier and just give it a chance to heal. Garden news, the squash is slowing down. The mint is all over the place. Why we didn't put it in a pot, we're questioning, because it's really taken over much of the garden. The garlic is out, it's drying. The onions did not do so well, and we're getting about 1.5 quarts of blueberries a day. So summer looks like it's in full swing. Today is June 21st, 2022, first day of summer. So I hope your summer is bountiful, not too hot, and all those good things. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gila Cert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.